because I'm at this conference in Canada and I don't want to frighten the Canadian attendees further by letting them know how perilously close the United States is to becoming a centrally controlled techno-tyranny.
And now, The Edwin Black Show. Sponsored by the books of Edwin Black, available on Amazon and at booksellers worldwide. And now, here's Edwin.
Welcome to the Edwin Black Show. I'm Edwin Black, investigative journalist, historian, and author of IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, Internal Combustion, and numerous other books in 200 editions in 40 languages in 190 countries worldwide. If you like our show, spread the word. Subscribe for alerts at theedwinblackshow.com. If you want to support our work, please visit theedwinblackshow.com/support. Your help, big or small, assures our complete and utter intellectual and uncensored journalistic independence. Again, just log on to the show and hit support. We have solidarity today from many national organizations, such as the Emerson Family Foundation, the Fuel Freedom Foundation, the Israel on Campus Coalition, Stand With Us, JNS, the Israeli American Council, EMET, American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, Scholars for Peace in the Middle East, ZOA Michigan, the Gross Family Center, Americans for Peace and Tolerance, and plenty more. Thank you, everyone. That said, I only speak for myself and for history. Today's episode is sponsored without any preconditions, requests, or stipulations by the Fuel Freedom Foundation, which is doing its utmost to improve fuel use on our planet. Today, we welcome guests from across North America, especially the United States, including our 4 watch parties in the U.S., the Villages, Newton, Massachusetts, Chicago, and Tampa Bay. Overseas, I see viewers logged on from Australia, Germany, Great Britain, Canada, Israel, Mexico, and other countries. Importantly, today we originate from the University of Ottawa in Canada's beautiful capital, from the Canadian Privacy Conference, which under the auspices of the Privacy and Access Council of Canada has brought together the most important figures in Canada's privacy establishment. They hail from intelligence, revenue, postal, academic, transport, regulatory, legislative, media, and ethics communities. These devoted men and women constitute our live audience today, in addition to our usual live Zoom audience. If you have a question limited to today's topic, place one short sentence in Zoom's QA feature. No statements or introductions, just your question. The Edwin Black Show, along with our YouTube site, is global and fast growing, enjoying tens of thousands of views. We speak frankly and without partisanship to a fragmented world seeking better understanding of our tormented past, our present very, very tense, and a future still uncertain. And remember, we will not be censored. By the way, stay tuned for my special word of wisdom at the very end of the show, just before I sign off. We'll get to our main topic, Privacy and Peril, Part 2, following up on a show we did in Season 2, and both episodes have been edited with great graphic documentation, and within the coming weeks, you will see them on our website. But first, some brief announcements. At the Edwin Black Show and our companion YouTube site, we have just released 2 edited and visually enhanced episodes tackling the daunting topics of the Afghanistan nightmare and the China threat, Part 1 and Part 2, plus our episode Yom HaGirush, which commemorates the coordinated mass expulsion of 850,000 Jews from Arab lands, penniless and stateless. It's a stunning episode as well. These are game-changing episodes for everyone. See them at theedwinblackshow.com or search YouTube for The Edwin Black Show. to get our official channel.
Also, while I am here in Ottawa, keynoting the Canadian Privacy Conference on the topic of IBM in the Holocaust.
When I leave here, I fly to Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina for 2 events. March 28th, first a lecture on ethics to their journalism students. I'm sure they could use it. And then I wrap up South Carolina with the keynote on IBM and the Holocaust, this time for the opening of the exhibit on America and the Holocaust, co-sponsored by both the U.S. Holocaust Museum and the American Library Association. Ottawa has been great, and I hope to see any of you in my travel cities. Items from the week. I'm dispensing with my normal pre-monologue and comments from the week's events because I'm at this conference in Canada and I don't want to frighten the Canadian attendees further by letting them know how perilously close the United States is to becoming a centrally controlled techno-tyranny with machines and machinations determining who can buy or sell, who can thrive, and who can barely stay alive. I will resume these incisive remarks next episode. Now we come to today's unnerving and completely frightening topic, Privacy in Peril Part 2, and not the last in our series. To jolt you into the mindset, something came to me after I finished my keynote here yesterday on IBM and the Holocaust. For all the decades I've documented the 6 phases of the Holocaust, all coordinated by IBM, which for 2 decades has been too cowardly to answer for its crimes. The 6 phases being the identification of the Jews, their organized expulsion from society, their pauperization, their ghettoization, their deportation, and then IBM's final triumph of techno-terrorism, the extermination of the Jews. As I ponder the tens of thousands of centrally coordinated concentration camps, the gas chambers, the thousands of trains and torments of the ghettos, the destruction of so many lives perpetrated against the Jews, gypsies or Roma, homosexuals, Polish people, intellectuals, and so many other groups. Behind it all, digging through the tears and fears of those 12 years, we see a privacy breach. The information age, which is the individualization of statistics, was born not in Silicon Valley, but in Berlin in 1933. It was the men and women of IBM who blindly worked for their sociopathic war criminal boss, the convicted extortionist Thomas J. Watson, whose name has now been redecorated as a cutesy new localized final solution to mankind's problems. It was these men and women who opened the dreaded box and revealed how to match a name and a personal history to a previously inanimate statistical data set. And this was done by Hollerith punch cards, the forerunner to today's computers. So, if Hitler was able to orchestrate the mass destruction of 6 million Jews and tens of millions of others across so many countries and continents, all in plain view, with the tacit approval and helping hands of governments and the giants of industry such as General Motors, Ford Motor Company, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Institution, and an international death chamber of commerce whose members came from the dark class, the merchants of death and their cohorts of all sorts. If all this global gashing, trashing, and gnashing could be accomplished with mere cardboard punch cards, imagine what the techno-tyrants can accomplish today with high-speed computers, powerful handheld telephones, and other contraptions, and now the ultimate reincarnation of the most evil, most unfeeling, most inhuman transgressor of them all, artificial intelligence. God on high and man down low have jointly decreed that humanity will be oppressed or be freed based on free will, on man's choice. For the moment, perhaps for the hour, we are still free to exercise our will to make our choice, but not for long, because these sugary, oh so pretty, oh so convenient and shiny apps, or shall we call them traps, each one an enticing apple offered by a corporate or government serpent. I fear that soon, no matter what they shout, they have the clout and they shall win out. Good people like me and thee will quiver and quake, argue and shake. Warnings we will make, but in that not too distant endpoint, I fear the bad will win out over the good, and before we are done, no one will know which is which. And on that depressing, not caressing note, I turn to my 2 esteemed panelists. We have one of Canada's fiercest and most persistent voices for personal privacy and data rights. We have Michael Geist, professor in law, and the Canadian Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce Law. But first, I turn to the organizer of this extraordinary event, the Edwin Black Show's regular on the issue of privacy and peril, my friend Sharon Polsky, Canada's #1 authority on what is wrong today and what will be wrong tomorrow with our privacy rights. Take the mic, Sharon, and tell me, Sharon, tell me please that I'm wrong, dead wrong, or possibly dead right. The screen is yours, Sharon.
Edwin, I wish I could tell you that you were dead wrong, but I fear that you are dead right, because we've seen it for so many decades now. Since 9/11, we've been told how righteous and proper and patriotic it is to give up our privacy just a little bit, and then a little bit more for a promise of security. That promise hasn't been fulfilled yet our privacy has been undermined. Meantime, we have technology that is just racing ahead far beyond what any of the country's laws can handle. And I'm not just talking about Canada, I'm talking about the United States, England, European countries, Australia, and countries around the world are scrambling to catch up to provide laws that will give the citizens a genuine right to privacy. Unfortunately, in so many places, those laws are being written by the tech companies themselves because it is in their interest to make sure that the laws look good and give us all a warm, fuzzy feeling that we will be protected, while it protects them being able to provide for their shareholders and increase their bottom line. And we also see, as you say, with artificial intelligence, it's the latest party game. Granted, an awful lot of amazing, positive, beneficial developments have artificial intelligence to credit: medical, scientific, genetic, for the good of the individual. But that's when it's an individual's choice, as you referred to, Edwin. But when it is somebody else imposing their choice on us, the tables are turned. We really have no effective choice. And keep in mind, when I talk about laws, there's laws being put in to regulate artificial intelligence, and some of them require the companies creating the artificial intelligence to assess the potential privacy risks. It's the very companies that are making those assessments. It is completely opaque to governments, to citizens, to everybody else. So how much farther ahead are we really?
Sharon, that was very compelling and very disconsolate.
And I think you hit the nail on the head that the very people who are creating the artificial intelligence and the privacy invading apps are the ones who are either influencing or actually writing the legislation that will govern us. And this is not just an issue of the United States and or Canada. It's, as you say, it's across the world, from England to Hong Kong to China to South Africa. I think that our greatest threat is artificial intelligence, and I think it's too late. I think the horse is out of the barn, and so many people are going to look at the plus side, at the pretty side, and not look at the horrific impact of what artificial intelligence can do, that is going to spread like wildfire.
So I'm going to turn it over to Michael Geist now. Sharon, keep your camera on. Michael, turn your camera on and take the mic.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm not used to being the optimist in the room when it comes to some of these issues. But I have to admit, I think that there are risks, to be sure, with technology. I think we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that there's some benefits as well. If I have a source of frustration, it has been, at least in Canada, and I think in a number of other jurisdictions, that I think the solution is not to say that I want to see these technologies to go away or these companies to go away, because I think both that is unlikely to happen. But even more, I do think that there are benefits that come from many of these technologies. And I think it would be a mistake to simply say this is somehow pure evil or something along those lines, and that we need to do away with tech. But what we do need are rules that ensure that we strike an appropriate balance, that we know that there are appropriate protections, that there is the ability to enforce where there are violations. And at least in our jurisdiction, but I think in a number of others, if there has been a frustration, is that this has not been a significant priority. The reality in Canada, at least, is that it seems that oftentimes the government is more interested in profiting off the revenues that these companies are able to generate, as opposed to trying to constrain some of the privacy violations. Sometimes likened it to some of these companies as being akin to a policy ATM, where government views them as being able to fund any number of policy objectives, whether that's Canadian film or television production or the media sector, as opposed to recognizing that some of those profits are being generated through real, sometimes questionable uses of our personal information. And we would do better, I think, to try to ensure that we had effective rules to try to constrain some of that activity as opposed to seek to profit from it.
So, Michael, you mean that in Canada, they profit off the misdeeds of these companies by taxation and fees in the same way that in the United States, they profit off of cigarettes. They tax this stuff and they make money on it. So does that make the Canadian government and by extension the American government, which is taxing the hell out of the profits of these companies, does that make them co-conspirators or facilitators or benefactors?
Well, I think at a minimum, I think they're just misplaced priority. We've seen a government that looks at the digital environment, that looks at these new technologies, and rather than starting at the places where I think there are serious concerns, that includes data protection and privacy, it includes anti-competitive behavior and what the competitive environment looks like, and seeking to establish a functioning market that addresses those kinds of concerns, it instead has chosen to prioritize issues where it does see a financial opportunity to fund policy priorities. It doesn't mean the government itself is personally benefiting from the revenues that are generated, so it's not a tax in that way, but it establishes basically cross-subsidy models where there are these kinds of payments that take place. And sometimes it results, I think, in almost head-spinning contradictions. So, for example, we've had the Canadian government ban the use of TikTok within government for many of the people who are at this conference. Yet at the same time, we've got the government saying that TikTok is a top priority to help develop Canadian culture and expand its audiences and to pay into the fund. And I can't quite reconcile the view that on the one hand, it is viewed as so dangerous such that it can't be used by people within government, and now in some provinces can't be used by professors or doctors or a range of other people. And at the same time, take the position that, well, we want to find ways to have TikTok enhance access to our culture or exposure of our culture or to help fund our culture. Seems to me there's a bit of an inconsistency there. And it speaks in some ways to the fact that there are views as financial benefits that may come from these companies. There's clear recognition how profitable they've been. And as opposed to trying to deal with the harms, they're basically saying, well, if these harms are going to occur anyway, we might as well derive some benefits from it, at least in terms of our policy agenda. And I personally think that's a case of misplaced priorities, the way I'd describe it.
That's a very kind comment, misplaced priorities. They're benefiting from the very thing that they are condemning. So because we have limited time, we're going to go right to the questions. We're going to take the questions which have been submitted to me in advance, take the questions live, and our third source of questions will be from anyone in the audience who wants to ask a question. No statements, just a single sentence. So we'll start with our watch party in the villages. What is the role of artificial intelligence in these privacy dangers? Michael.
I think we're still I must admit, I think we are still at an early stage of fully understanding some of the implications of AI. I mean, we see some of the things like ChatGPT and the like, and I don't think actually that our conventional privacy rules translate as effectively into the AI system, because in some ways what AI is trying to develop as large a corpus as possible, learn off of that and make predictions of what, say, the next words might be in some of these language models that we see out there. I think we can identify the risks quite clearly, especially when decisions are made not by individuals, but rather by machines and by algorithms. And to the extent to which those decisions are driven through personal information, I don't think you have to be Nostradamus to recognize that there's some pretty clear risks that can arise out of that. But I think it's still early days, and early days both in terms of how that technology is being implemented, the data that is being collected and being used. which again, to try to be, I suppose, the optimist here, suggests that there is still, I think, some time to try to ensure that we've got an appropriate regulatory framework in place. Again, some of the concern is that, at least in our own country, we haven't seen a lot of that. There is an AI bill, Bill C-27, that's designed to deal with some of these issues, but frankly, it punts virtually all the significant AI-related regulatory issues to the future, to regulation. And so it's not clear that our government at least is ready to grapple with that question.
Well, I'm curious, if we started tomorrow morning, how long do you think it would take to get effective legislation? I mean, in the United States, we're still working off legislation regulating the internet that was done decades ago when people were still trying to find out if they could get onto AOL.
Yeah, it's a good line. You know what? I think Europe's provided some models around this. In a Canadian context, if we're honest about it, we tend to think in privacy terms in decades. If we're honest, if we're candid about it, we've got a privacy law that is private sector privacy law that's more than 20 years old. It included a mandated review every 5 years. There was such a review conducted. It took about another 10 years to implement some of the recommended changes. And we now have a new piece of legislation that's in its second iteration that has not been on any sort of fast track. And as I say, it does include AI rules. And I think your question highlights why I think there is a risk in putting forward AI legislation that is neither well thought out nor sufficiently prescriptive to deal with some of these kinds of concerns, because it almost incentivizes governments to put up sort of the mission accomplished sign and say, hey, we regulated AI. We'll get to some of the details later. And yet some of the real concerns will continue to be there, despite the fact that we will have said to have regulated in the space.
And yet just a few moments ago, we were told by the speaker at this conference that by 2026, it's estimated that some 90% of the content on the internet will be generated or manufactured. So who's got decades when this stuff is moving at the speed of artificial intelligence?
Well, you know, you highlight what has been an ongoing issue back to the days of AOL, which is that legislation moves at a different pace than does technology. And that's not to suggest, I think, that we need legislators that anticipate where technology is going or regulate the technology of the day. We've seen any number of failures when there is an attempt to sort of pigeonhole existing tech into a legislative framework. But we unquestionably need legislators and regulators that are able to move, I think, with greater speed. And I think, frankly, the fact that some of these issues, again, it's easiest for me to speak in the context of what takes place in Canada, too often with a partisan lens and with almost too much hubris with respect to some of the proposals that are put out there. So there's a bill that's proposed, and it feels as if governments, and this is true of both, frankly, of liberal and dating back conservative governments, almost view this as a personal affront if somehow they haven't gotten it right from the get-go. And then if there needs to be amendments, somehow that's a demonstration of weakness. And I think
Sharon,
that's a real mistake.
Sharon, quickly, what do you think about artificial intelligence? Is it the threat of the day?
It depends, like any other technology, who's using it or abusing it. So in some people's hands, certainly it is a threat to some people. I'm not saying that all artificial intelligence, first of all, works the way we want it to, or we, the people who are under scrutiny or subject to its calculations. But there's an awful lot of artificial intelligence that is being promoted as the perfect solution to whatever problem. Sometimes it's a solution looking for a problem. There's been so many instances in Canada, the States, Europe, where artificial intelligence determines certain decisions, although they don't decide, they come to conclusions, mathematical conclusions, that people have defrauded the welfare system or have done something terrible, and lives have been ruined. People have been jailed based on what turns out to have been faulty artificial intelligence. And one of the problems is that artificial intelligence is trained on historical information, whether it is chat and text and whatever is on the internet, or from hiring and firing decisions and promotions in human resources situations. It can only predict based on the historical patterns. So it is perpetuating the biases and the problems of our history, but it's being promoted as wonderful because it is technology. Not all technology is good for everybody.
It reminds me of what the technicians said during the IBM days when they were designing systems for the Hitler regime. They said it should be done. But I'm also reminded that if AI relies upon the internet and the internet is toxic, and I've checked this with all my contacts in AI, that ipso facto AI is toxic. We're going to have a special episode on artificial intelligence coming up within a couple of weeks from the watch party in Newton, Massachusetts. Now I'm going to ask my friends here in Canada if you know how the Fig Newton got its name. It was invented in Newton, Massachusetts. All right, we thank you, Newton. Their question is, what is the very next thing we need done to protect our rights, and can we succeed? Sharon, what do you say?
I think we all spend an awful lot of time surfing the net and doom scrolling and finding out about all sorts of trivialities of life. They might be very interesting, very compelling, some very informative and educational. We have to take the time to inform ourselves as to what our rights and our responsibilities are about access to information and our privacy rights that were declared in 1948 by the United Nations as a fundamental human right. In Canada, our legislators have not yet seen fit to declare privacy a fundamental human right, nor have they seen fit to do so in this proposed legislation, Bill C-27, that Michael Geist has just referred to. We have to inform ourselves because our authorities, our schools, our lawmakers have not been doing that. It's up to us to take the responsibility and tell our legislators what we want and what we do not want. We have to make better choices individually as consumers, as individuals, as parents, teachers, as corporate citizens. And if we are in one of these organizations that is developing the artificial intelligence or the privacy invasive technology or the legislation that's going to undermine encryption for some promise of security, we have to make a tough decision of either doing what's right and standing up and saying, this is wrong, I will not participate, we need to steer this ship in a different direction to protect individuals, not just the corporate bottom line. We have to speak up.
Your last remark invokes what I said, that man has free will to choose his destiny and how he advances his destiny or retards it or diverts it. Michael, what do you say? What's the very next thing that we need to do to protect our rights, and can we succeed?
I think Sharon's done a good job of highlighting both the impediments and frustration that we've experienced in Canada for those that have been concerned with privacy. And in a room like this, it's obvious preaching to the choir a little bit about people that are interested and concerned and I think discouraged that it has not been enough of a priority. I think it requires champions at the government level. I mean, and someone who recognizes both that it's an issue and is prepared to say that this needs the kind of prioritization that it does. And I think we need to also be realistic, at least in the current political environment. This is viewed as an issue that may well be important, but doesn't provide a whole lot of political benefit. And that's part of the problem, where you get a wide range of views. I think Sharon's right about grounding our privacy laws in a human rights framing. I think that would go a long way and is an important thing to do. But at the same time, there are others, of course, that take differing views. And if you're sitting there as a politician saying, well, where's my political win coming out of this, where I'm going to just leave just about everybody somewhat unhappy? It's one of those kind of pieces of legislation that invariably leaves, on the one hand, everybody says, well, it's not exactly what I was looking for. And so politicians are looking for wins in the current environment, at least here in this country. And I think that then really does require leadership from within the government that says it's whether or not this is going to result in a significant benefit politically is immaterial. It's going to result in a significant benefit for the country as a whole, and for the interests of people's privacy and their human rights more broadly. And so it's incumbent on us to move forward with it.
Well said. From the watch party in Chicago, my hometown, wish I can go back there. We have heard a lot about the Internet of Things. Is this part of our privacy peril? I'll answer first, and I'll say that the Internet of Things is which has been in development for years. And bear in mind that I was one of the early adopters of home computers in the 1990s. In the Internet of Things, it literally turns everything into a computer or some type of a computer or a computing device. That means it's your refrigerator, your dishwasher. It could be the lamplight. It almost certainly could be the lights in the ceiling. It could be smart highways, traffic lights. It could be anything which has a computerized component in it, turns out to be a gatherer of information, and that sends out the information. And RFID, radio frequency ID, which is one of the books I'm working on, is only part of that threat. And the issue was raised even yesterday. Would it be possible to stop a person from driving past 11 o'clock at night to a liquor store to buy vodka or wine? And I'm reminded that a few weeks ago, we revealed that the infrastructure bill has a passage in it which obligates car companies to control and disable vehicles remotely. This for inebriation, but possible it could be for improper carbon use. It could be for crime. It could be for being a bad citizen. Ford has already indicated it will disable cars for a missed payment, not even electric cars, just any ICE, internal combustion car. Tesla has been disabling cars for quite some time who haven't paid upgrade fees. You're driving down the road and suddenly your car stops. But you can imagine another one. There's a warrant for your arrest or you're just under suspicion. Your car suddenly turns around and drives to the nearest police station. So the Internet of Things is putting the internet everywhere and actually making us the man in the middle as we are producing the information that's coming in and coming out. Sharon, what do you know?
Well, unfortunately, you're absolutely right, but it's not just outside in the public spaces. It is inside our homes because the Internet of Things. I built a home 15 years ago. The builder would not sign off on the plans until I identified where the internet connection would be behind the refrigerator. Refrigerators, stoves, every appliance, your toaster oven, everything that has an RFID chip that is connected to the internet gives an individual unique signature that can be monitored. Insurance companies love it because they say, we can help you avoid the damage from a water leak if you have a sensor on your hot water tank, on your pipes. We will keep an eye on it. We will notify you so that you can get the plumber in before there's any damage. Of course, it's not for our protection or our convenience. It's to minimize claims and their cost in paying out claims. And in the meantime, they're gathering all this information. In several Canadian jurisdictions, it has already long ago been mandated that every house must have a smart meter for the electricity consumption, which also monitors the individual signatures of every appliance. So imagine what happens when the insurance company sees that the lights go on at 2 o'clock in the morning and stay on for an hour and a half, and the fridge is open several times, not just for that one glass of milk, and the stove goes on, and the washing machine. Nobody stops to ask and find out that you work late and that is your evening. You're not on a regular 9 to 5. You have your own schedule. They make choices on your behalf. They make decisions and assumptions. And typically, insurance companies especially car insurance companies, love it because they say, well, somebody's up in the middle of the night. Obviously, they must have insomnia or a health problem. So we'll check out those bits of information also. And if you are up in the middle of the night, that means you're probably tired. And tiredness has been proven to be as dangerous when you're driving on the road as inebriation. So watch your rates go up, watch the questions. And again, it's all been sold to us as a convenience. It certainly is, it can be, but it's who is using the information for what precise purposes. No different than telematics, where we're told you can get the benefit of reduced auto insurance rates if you only put in this wonderful little doohickey in your car, but you must have the app on your phone at all times. You're allowed to turn it off sometimes. They don't tell you how much of the time is sometimes. And what they also don't say is that they're not really monitoring the car. It is the app in the phone that is monitoring the phone and everything in the telephone. And the companies that are doing the monitoring on the phone are all based out of the States, some in Europe, which is not as bad because at least they have the GDPR. But when it's American and then the information is collected in the States about Canadians who want this monetary convenience of not having to pay exorbitant rates, they're paying with their information. And again, assumptions are made, calculations, artificial intelligence calculations are made about them. We don't have the opportunity to defend, to explain. No one asks. It's to our detriment.
That was an exquisite explanation, Sharon. And remind me to tell you that State Farm just raised my rates because of a doohickey in my car. And the explanation was, we observed you decelerated.
Decelerated in,
Yes.
in what situation?
They wouldn't say, but I'm sure we did decelerate at some point. Mark in London wants to know, can transnational companies be controlled? Let me answer that. It's been a specialty of mine for too many decades. Transnational companies are the great threat. IBM began as a transnational company. Thomas Watson used to say, if you don't like the policies of some of our customers, find something you can like about them. And IBM was doing business with 70 or more countries. We have people like Google and Amazon and Facebook that are working with scores of nations and observing local rules in every country, whether they are moral or not, whether they're internationally recognized as legal or not. They are a great threat. We see TikTok in everybody's phone. It's controlled in China. We see the Weather Channel, which my friend in Chicago from the ABC local station started, and it got bought up by IBM, and they're now gathering up all your information and selling it to who knows what and giving you ads. And so there is no way to legislate against it because you don't know who's really controlling the company. I'll give you an example. The biggest motorized partner of the Third Reich in Europe during World War II was Opel. Opel was making the Blitz truck for the Blitzkrieg. They were they were helping with the Ju-88 bombers, the landmines, the Panzer tanks. Who was Opel? Opel was controlled by another war criminal, General Motors, in the United States through a phony board. So they had a phony board in Germany making all the so-called decisions, but getting everything ratified in Detroit. I wrote a couple of books about that. One is my book, Internal Combustion. But it really doesn't need a nation. It can be done out in the ocean on a platform. Tesla is now returning rockets on a platform. China could invent a new nation tomorrow on an expanded rock in the middle of the China Sea. They can just build it up. They can have it declare its independence. They can recognize it Remember, the Taliban in Afghanistan was only recognized by 2 countries. It only takes a few. And so, yes, it's a great threat. Michael.
I think that there is oftentimes going to be it's not a level playing field where you've got large multinationals in a position to move their IP, move their revenues, and engage in certain kinds of practices that makes it incredibly challenging for any individual country, particularly, we're here in Canada, particularly in a smaller country like Canada, where even if you're thinking you're punching above your weight, the ability to exert significant regulatory control over those large players, I think, is a challenge. That said, I will again sort of provide a bit more optimism here. And that is to suggest that we have seen in recent years that aggressive regulation combined with significant penalties does have some ability to influence corporate behavior. You take a look at what takes place in Europe and the GDPR, and with real penalties and regulators are willing to act. It isn't perfect, and there continues to be significant concerns. But I don't think that we find ourselves in a position to say, well, we're completely helpless in this environment. There are, you highlighted sort of a mix there of corporate initiatives with countrywide initiatives. And I think those are different. I think when we're talking about corporate activity, I think there is still the ability for countries, particularly those with sizable markets, with powerful governments, to exert control, to exert greater regulatory might and oversight. Doesn't mean they're always willing to do it. Doesn't mean they'll always do it in a way we think is correct. But nevertheless, I think there are some powers. Where we are engaged in geopolitical challenge, mentioned Chinese government, well, that's something else entirely. And there aren't shareholders there that will be answerable. These aren't publicly listed companies. These are very powerful governments in their own right. And so sometimes I think we need to sort of get a little more granular in terms of where we think some of these perceived threats are and what some of the appropriate responses might be.
Sharon, are these international forces, corporate and state-sponsored corporate, are they a big threat?
The fines, I mean, they're eye-watering for most people and for small companies, but when a major corporation receives a fine of over $400 million US and has made 60 or 80 billion dollars in a quarter, it's lunch money. It's something that comes off their bottom line as a line item in their finance, and they continue carrying on because that's just a cost of doing business. Does it stop them? No. They've got very deep pockets, so they have a lot of money for very, very influential lobbying. And unfortunately for us, a lot of the politicians accept their assistance, whether it's writing the privacy legislation that strips people of their right to private action, or it's privacy legislation in name only. The major corporations also play off of being international by locating in a more lenient jurisdiction, perhaps, or avoiding certain laws of a different jurisdiction.
They use it to their advantage. They have the means, the money, and the motivation to do so.
Well, I'm also going to disagree with Michael. In fact, I like Michael. He's such an optimist. I need an optimist on my show, and I'm going to have him on frequently as the official optimist of the Edwin Black Show. So I'm reminded of that IBM circumvented the sale of punch cards and machinery for the German Wehrmacht after World War II. Started by running it through Vichy France, by running it through Sweden, by backdating the documents. I'm reminded that we have sold oil to the bad guys, and we've sold oil through overseas subsidiaries. When I had exclusive access to the British Petroleum Archives, I think I was the first and last, I could see that they were making a new subsidiary every day with a different name to accept responsibility. And I also believe, as do most right-thinking people, in the United States and perhaps in Canada that the lobbyists will have their day, and they will make a lot of noise and scream and shout. And at the end of the day, they will pay for a midnight revision. And this revision in the United States will not even be in plain sight. It'll be in reconciliation. We have the Senate and we have the House, and they each pass their own version. Everybody screams and hollers. Then at midnight, there's a reconciliation meeting, and that's where they sock it to you. And they've got the money, they've got the clout, and we can all just shout. Let's go to Maxine in Montreal. That's just on the street from here, right? Is it true the privacy invaders and exploiters cannot be regulated no matter what we do? Well, that just takes up from what we said. It's a question. Are you Michael or are you Edwin? If you're Michael, there's hope. If you're Edwin, there's no hope. Sharon, what do you say?
Tenacity absolutely has its rewards, and it's up to us to realize that we have to push and fight, not just accept what has been handed to us. It always amazes me. I've never yet figured out the people who approve these privacy undermining technologies and laws and the technologies that track us. Don't they realize they too are going to be subject to those very same technologies? The artificial intelligence, they want to know where we as employees are coming and going and what we're doing on our time. But even the people who make the laws are not always going to be in that position. The people who are looking at us who, it used to be the elected and the electorate. Now the tables seem to have turned as to who answers to whom, but they're not always going to be in elected office. And the laws that they're passing now will affect them and their families, their children as well. How do they not realize it and care?
Know something? That's a question I've always asked myself. As I've investigated corruption, as I've toxic foods, pollution of the planet, impropriety, death and destruction, unequal justice. The people who make this happen, what about their families? But they believe they are immune because as Bill Gates can do, he can buy as much farmland as he wants. He currently owns so much farmland in the United States, it equals twice the size of Manhattan, and he's got huge amounts in Hawaii. Tony in Sarasota, Florida. Meta or Facebook impacts almost 4 billion people. It's actually about 3.7, I think, billion. It's nearly the same with Google and Amazon. This is bigger than almost all countries. How long before these companies create their own transnational authorities with their own currencies, end user license agreements that supersede state and national law and even enforcement and punishment regimes? That's an excellent question. And we have to understand that some of the first projections of national authority overseas was the East Indies company in the 1600s. They went out, they conquered lands, they committed crimes. The whole concept of the nation, as opposed to an empire, really began formulating around 1658 with the Westphalia Pact. I would say it really, the United States of America, currently still united for the time being, was the first of these independent states, nations, along with France. And then in 1917, we had the concept of self-determination and nationalism, and the League of Nations as a cover for oil exploitation and land grabs to facilitate commerce, invented out of whole cloth with pencil and paper, imaginary countries like Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, the modern Hijaz, modern Egypt. Jordan itself was invented in 1920 with a memo written by Winston Churchill. And Iraq was invented solely so the British Petroleum could put together 3 Ottoman provinces and attach them to a piece of Turkish land which had oil. And so really, is the national model going to be it? Or is it going to be, or is it possible for Facebook? We were here and we heard that Facebook had a plan for its own currency called the Libra, which it shelved, but it could bring that back out. And people are no longer in their ethnic tribes, they're in their telephone tribes. This is what is commanding the next generation. And it will be possible to find people who are more interested in getting a credit from Amazon than probably $10 or $20 every time I return something from Amazon, which is not more than once a day. I get a request. Would you like an Amazon credit, or would you like to get a real credit to your credit card? What do you say, Sharon?
We are back to the pre-industrial revolution with piecework, working at home, living in company towns, and being controlled by the company. And we haven't seen it coming. It's been death by 1,000 slices. And all of a sudden it's here and people are wondering, what happened? How did this happen? And what do we do about it? And that's great. The ones who are questioning it, the ones who don't question it and just say, oh, it's okay, they will take care of us. Well, who is they? And whose best interest do they have at heart, really? Again,
Yes,
we have to question.
Sorry, Edwin,
I agree with you,
get-
but let's hear from the optimist.
Honestly, yeah, let's hear from the honestly. The 100 years is an apt timeline. 100 years ago, there was a global pandemic as well. Millions died. People stayed at home not because they could work from home, but because they were trying to survive. And society and the planet suffered from a Spanish flu that created enormous upheaval. Please, we just got through a pandemic where we are now, within a couple of years, able to meet once again. I suspect everyone here is vaccinated. We were able to work from home and continue on with our lives. Our kids were able to continue to be educated using these technologies that you decry. The notion that somehow we're in a planetary disaster and we've come full circle with the same kind of awfulness that might have existed 100 years ago is just patently wrong. I'm not saying that there aren't risks, but surely we have to recognize the advances that occur, whether that's with RNA vaccines or communications technologies that allow me to see my parents at the other end of the world, or my kids to continue to go to school, or us to be able to meet in this kind of way. It's not all bad.
Well, I think you misunderstand, Michael. I didn't say it's all bad. I think most of it's pretty good. In fact, that's the problem. It's real good. I myself am leveraging this, but the real question is that was asked by Tony in Sarasota was not a good or bad question. Do you think it's possible for transnational authorities to issue their own currencies and user license agreements that supersede state and national law? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it is. Anyone is capable of issuing their own cryptocurrency right now, as Facebook considered doing. There are tens of thousands of them. It doesn't mean they get adopted in any meaningful way, and it doesn't mean that it has any significant impact in terms of what we see taking place right now in the global finance world. Is this some nefarious plot to replace the US dollar if you happen to create some weird dog crypto coin? I must admit, I don't really think that it is. That's not to say that there aren't real risks with some of these companies and that we need appropriate regulations. But let's focus, I think, on the issues that matter. And I think some of these things are, frankly, harmful more because they distract from the significant concerns that can arise in the context of some of these companies rather than enlighten us to where the real risks are.
Well, now that you mentioned replacing the dollar, it should be noted that there's a massive international effort right now underway called de-dollarization, and it's being led by numerous groups, including Iran, China, Saudi Arabia has just joined up, and the recent rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia that happened a couple of weeks ago under the tutelage of China is now being seen as a step closer to the de-dollarization of petrodollars. And so soon it will not be petrodollars, but it'll be petro-yuan. And in fact, China has already developed its own digital currency. So I believe that corporations have proven, giant corporations have proven over and over again for many decades that they will do what they want, when they want, because they believe they have the right. But under no circumstances am I going to hide under a rock. I'm going to use every one of these technological levers that I have. But I believe Sharon and people at this conference have asked, just because you have the technology and you can get it done, must the information be gathered? Must it be aggregated? Must it be sold and combined? You know, they say that when you go through the airport, they do a scan on your body and it's not retained. And so I think we need to find that balance between privacy, security, personal anonymity, and the need to make a big dollar for the corporations and the ability to use fabulous new technology, especially as Michael has explained, occurred during this COVID emergency and has made it possible for this show and many millions of others to come to you. Peter and Marcia in Los Angeles, can we realistically opt out? Michael.
It's pretty tough to live off the grid at this point in time. I think, I think that there are things that we can walk back from. You don't have to use Facebook. I suspect many people here don't. You don't have to use search engines to find the news. You can go directly to some of the news sites themselves if you like. You don't have to buy from Amazon. You can walk down to the local store and purchase from them as well. I think we do a lot of these things because there is convenience associated with it, and we do like some of the kinds of things they offer. Can you disconnect entirely? I think it's pretty challenging in our modern world, and I guess I would ask, why would you want to?
Well, maybe you wouldn't want to go off the grid and be like the Unabomber, but what you might want to do is just live a life of privacy where you benefit from modern technology, where you have a refrigerator that keeps your food cold, you have a countertop oven that bakes the food and doesn't make a record of everything you're cooking and doesn't make a record of everything that's in the fridge. The way the fridges are being configured now, they know everything in the fridge. When you remove the milk, they say, oh, it's time to buy a new quart of milk. And when you throw your garbage out, the garbage collectors are going to come by and sweep your RFID information. So the happy medium is to be happy with the medium and not have the medium encroach upon your privacy and your personal liberty. Sharon, what do you say? Can we realistically opt out? I'm not talking about being a hermit.
I'm not talking about being a hermit either. And as you say, there are advantages. Michael, I don't disagree. Technology has provided tremendous benefits. But I think an important part, and by the way, Edwin, there are municipalities in Canada that several years ago imposed bylaws that you must use clear garbage bags, and there are scanners. They have bylaw officers who go by and scan your garbage to see if recyclables are in the garbage that will end up in landfill, and you get a ticket. So it's already in place. But the technology, we can, right now, is it possible to disconnect completely? No. There's a place in Calgary, world famous, the Calgary Stampede, and a long time employee did not have a bank account, did not want a bank account. He wanted to be paid in cash, old-fashioned currency. It went to court, and the court said, no, you must have a bank account so that there is automatic deposit. His choice was removed. So it's not entirely possible depending where you work. And worse than that, right now, we don't know what we are accepting when we choose to participate in a lot of these technologies, because we don't know exactly who's collecting our information, precisely what they are going to do with it, who's going to receive it, share it, analyze it, distribute it, use it for artificial intelligence. We don't know. All we know, and that's a function of the legislation, is we are told the purposes for which it will be collected, and it is permitted to be in very, very general terms. We will collect your personal information and use it as we see fit to produce the best return for our shareholders. It's a business purpose. There is no granularity. And even if there were more than that, right now we have no way of opting out of certain aspects. So it's an all or nothing Faustian bargain. Either you agree or you can go elsewhere. But if all the organizations, all the companies in a particular industry have essentially the same terms, what real choice do we have? It's not choice, it's coercion.
I would add that Sweden has become a cashless society. And that means that they have the ability to stop a person from even making a purchase. For instance, and here I'm bringing up the two most dangerous words in my vocabulary: central control. They have the ability to stop you from buying liquor after 11 o'clock if liquor should not be purchased after 11 o'clock. I think one of our presenters talked about that in terms of digital currency, the mandated remote control of all vehicles within 3 years in the United States, not just electric cars, but any old pickup. This is very frightening because if it can be done for inebriation, we talk about the slippery slope. Can it also be done for failure to register? Can it be done because there's too many people in the car? Can it be done? And who's making these decisions? What 21-year-old with a nose ring is making these decisions for the old people who want to just drive down the road?
To add to what you were just saying, Edwin, that I was reading in Britain, there is a proposal now to bring in facial recognition to be able to identify the person driving the older car so that they can be fined for driving a gas guzzler, essentially. Although the very same government did research demonstrating that older cars are not as much of a gas guzzler as modern vehicles. But they're going to put in facial rec technology.
There are groups of people in my team, and my team spans numerous time zones, who are very concerned about facial recognition, because it's basically done by a bunch of clear-skinned people, and they never made adjustments for people of darker skin tone. In fact, I've just been researching when color photography broke into the common market and who was and the woman who was the baseline for color photography. So all of these technologies have their upside and their downside. The question is, which side is going to win, the upside or the downside? And I want to remind our viewers that I am the one who wants more security, more hours of the day than any of you can stay awake. I am the one who wants this technology to work. But like I said once again, it's okay to have a refrigerator. Keep your milk chilled without it reporting on how much milk you did or didn't have. Next question, Nicholas in New York, making trouble. Who will stand up to these privacy threats the most, the Democrats or the Republicans? Nicholas, I'm in Canada now, and I'm not allowed to talk about what the Democrats are going to do to the country. But to answer your question, it will, of course, be the Democrats, because even now, I don't know how much people in Canada follow our Democrats and Republicans, but the Democrats right now are trying to impose vast measures of censorship, the undermining of journalism. We had a low point in the United States of America when a congressional committee of Democrats grilled two journalists, Matt Taibbi, a famous one, and who revealed the Twitter files, demanded to know his sources, insulted him. And of course, we had the Mary Poppins Ministry of Truth, and which was there to determine who was telling truth and who was not telling truth, and how truthful was the truth. So I think it will be Republicans. Sharon, you follow American politics. What do you say?
Well, you talk about that happening in the States, but we have this very similar legislation on the books, well, proposed for Canada. And England has very much the same, and Europe and Australia, where it's to monitor all content on the internet to protect us against comments that, and I quote from our government, our federal government, who a few months ago said, the internet content has to be monitored to protect against comments that could undermine confidence in the government, in public federal institutions, and the public sector. And now we see that coming to life in a variety of pieces of federal legislation to have the platforms routinely, proactively monitor all content, text, email, images, for objectionable content. And who determines what is objectionable? Apparently, as Michael said, it's going to be, the fine details will be in the regulations that will be revealed after these bills become law. It's going to be up to members of the public sector to determine what they want the platforms to monitor. The same thing will happen in England under the Online Safety Act. Wonderfully euphemistic titles implying that it's for our public good. And in some respects, it certainly will be. But when it encapsulates and captures all content, and the only way of gauging what is in the content is to break encryption, and some of these pieces of legislation essentially outlaw things like Signal, what are we left with? And then I have to again ask, the legislators own confidential discussions, national security discussions, doctor-patient confidentiality, lawyer-client privilege. How will all of that be safeguarded? How will professionals be able to meet their professional requirements when the platform that they are communicating on is obviously, because they are required to, breaking encryption and monitoring the content? And I had a wonderful conversation with one of our ministers of parliament several months ago about this, and she actually comes from a journalism background. And I explained that this is how it will work, and I've verified it with world-leading cryptographers. And I said, everything's going to have to be monitored, you're saying? That means encryption will have to be broken. And she looked at me and said, I don't think that's how it has to work. No, I don't think so. And that's all.
All right, Michael, did you have a thought about that? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll go back to the source of the question, which was, who'd be better on this, Republicans or Democrats? And I think we get the same question might be posed in Canada: who's going to be better on this, Liberals or Conservatives? And I think it highlights part of the problem, that issues that I think are central to everyone. You've described it in really stark terms around the impacts on humanity more broadly, are basically just turned into party politics. And I think that there are enormous problems with how, frankly, both parties, at least over the last 20 years in Canada, have handled privacy. And the notion that some other Republicans are better on social media regulation is farcical. I think they've raised any number. I've seen real attempts to get engaged in regulations that I think raise significant speech concerns from the right. And you see some of the same kinds of issues as Sharon highlights at times from the left. And that's part of the problem. The problem is that these issues at this stage, rather than trying to find, I know this sounds, hopelessly naive to suggest that we ought to be able to find some kind of consensus that addresses the underlying problems, because there is a commonality across party lines that affects all of us. But somehow this issue too is treated as partisan. And so when we ask this question, well, who's going to be better on this? We're asking the wrong question. It isn't about which party is going to be better. Both of them, I think, have shown themselves to be singularly incapable of developing appropriate legislative responses, whether in Canada or in the United States.
Michael, your comments bring out a very poignant and biting reality. That something that should be treated as a threat or a benefit or a right to the entire nation, whether it's in the United States or Canada or Great Britain, becomes party politics. You may ask, how is this possible? How is it possible that something as fundamental as our rights, red or blue, Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal, in whatever your country you're in, how is it possible that this is distilled and boiled down to the needle of partisan politics, magnetized, which can go in either direction depending upon in which way you point it? And I'm very sorry to agree with you that both. That's okay. I can agree with you. I'm very being optimistic that both of these parties have their own way of recapsulating the argument and spitting it out in their own terms. Because at the end of the day, all we're going to do is shout, and at midnight, in come the people with clout, and the regulations will be made. And you know what I found growing up in Chicago? The more the judge shouted at the defendant, the more I knew the fix was in. Okay, let's go to some online questions from Serbia. Luca in Serbia, niche. Is it true that an AI developed at the University of Texas, after analyzing the rate of human development, predicted that the human race will cease to exist by the year 2040? That far off. Okay, Michael, you study this. What do you know?
I'm literally speechless with that question. I don't have it.
Okay. Well, I actually don't think it's that much of a laughing matter, because there's a lot of people running around speaking Malthusian philosophy, saying that we're running out of food. The population is overgrowing. I myself have within the show, we have a series called 2033, and our next question is about food, and can we make enough food to make the planet? There are a lot of people in this country with a lot of brains, some of whom own their own Twitter companies, who believe that we're going to have to go to Mars to rescue our civilization, which makes some people ask whether the people on Mars came to Earth to rescue their civilization. So I believe that this is being proposed right now, that we're running out of room, running out of resources, running out of climate safety, and it's understandable. And think about this. Think about this question from Luca in Serbia, because we said it before. If the internet is toxic and AI is therefore toxic, perhaps AI will latch on to some bizarre notion that that we're all going to implode in 2040. So what's the problem if we advance that a couple of years? We can now generate. We have systems now that can generate 30,000 bots within 3 hours. and they can infect the internet. It would be the algorithm that counts. So I think it's a great question, not only about what could be, but what artificial intelligence thinks could be. And this is part of what our conundrum is now. We don't have the answers because we don't even know the questions. Good question, Serbia. Sharon, do you have a comment?
I do have a comment. First of all, artificial intelligence does not think. Please, language matters. And you just said artificial intelligence will think. It doesn't. More than that, though, I go back again. Artificial intelligence is great, but it's being used to repeat history. Last week, I heard that there's a new artificial intelligence device being sold. It's been developed to identify, based on your facial features, whether you are a criminal.
Well, that was tried in the 19th century before
Exactly.
eugenics.
Galton,
The so-called
who took measurements of a person's head.
born
If
criminal.
that's right. If your eyes were too wide set, you were a criminal, and that was it. You were branded, and you couldn't escape that branding. And now we have artificial intelligence doing the same thing, which is as inaccurate as the artificial intelligence to assess your mood, your emotion, your happiness, your depression level. And that is now running behind an awful lot of the so-called confidential communications platforms that probably many people in this room and in your listening audience are compelled to use in their workplace, where everything they say is being monitored and analyzed, and somebody is being told if certain keywords are typed. You don't know it. That's become a precondition, a condition of your employment. You are being monitored on these mandatory confidential communication platforms.
Well, I'd like to agree with you that I misspoke because you are correct. And I said this last week when actually I said it in England about a week ago on that show that you didn't come on, that I did. And I corrected the guy and I said, artificial intelligence is not actually artificial intelligence. It's fake artificial intelligence. It's like the phone. It's just trying to predict the next best word, the next best decision based upon what's fed into it. So I was wrong. It doesn't, but it can still predictively and just from machine learning come to a conclusion. And it can attempt to achieve that conclusion without, which is why I said in my opening remarks, it's uncaring, it's unthinking, and it actually only has a machine's view of reality.
And that is why it is so critical that there be human intervention, a person who actually reviews the conclusions that the artificial intelligence has come to and make a human decision.
All right, here we have a question from Indiana. Which are the most dangerous apps in terms of privacy? Does deleting them even matter? I think she's referencing TikTok. After you delete it, it's still there. We've all had a program that you can't delete. Michael, what do you know?
I know that there are issues with lots of apps. There are issues with TikTok certainly as well. We've seen it. I think that the underlying problem, again, maybe it's because when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you're a law professor, everything looks like a law or regulation to be solved. But I do think that part of the fundamental problem is that we don't have laws that address this in an appropriate fashion. TikTok may be somewhat unique given the links to the Chinese government or reported links to the Chinese government. But in terms of what it's doing with data at an individual user level from a collection perspective is not all that different from many other apps that are out there. And so the problem is bigger than TikTok. It speaks to more broadly to social media related concerns, the lack of awareness for people about what is taking place. So very often we install apps without really recognizing what some of the implications might be. That speaks to a lack of transparency associated with the system, to weak rules that haven't done a good enough job to deal with it. Are there instances where after to the question of if you delete an app, does it make a difference? Well, it certainly should. If the app is still retaining your data and actively collecting your data after you have deleted it, I mean, that's quite clearly running afoul of even our outdated privacy rules and any number of rules, certainly the FTC Act in the United States as well. So that's unlawful behavior. Does that mean unlawful behavior doesn't occur? Well, it may well, but I think people, generally speaking, at least from reputable apps, should feel that if they've gone ahead and fully deleted it from their system, that it isn't collecting their data.
Okay, we got a couple more questions yet, and then we've run overtime with this excellent discussion. I must say, this is the most valuable collection of human beings in Canada to hear this message in this room, because you are the people who can make a difference. James in Naples, that's Naples, Florida, not Naples, Italy. Has your book, IBM and the Holocaust, come out yet in the Brad Pitt movie? Okay, so it's been announced that Brad Pitt's making a great big movie with my book. It hasn't come out yet, but I'm told it's going to be done this spring and come out at the end of the year. That means absolutely nothing. The most popular song in Hollywood is Promises, Promises. And that's my story. 10, Dinesh in Washington. Are we doomed? Okay, let's go to Michael.
I'm feeling doomed right now, but but no, we are not doomed. No, we are not doomed.
All right, that's your answer. No, Sharon, what's your answer? Are we doomed?
We are not doomed. We are doomed for change, significant change. Some more rapid than a lot of people will be comfortable with. Some will take a very long time. And it's not inevitable. That, I think, is an important thing to remember. All of these technologies, we have choices. They are not inevitable. If we don't buy the home monitoring systems, if we choose not to pay with a credit card and leave a data trail, if we choose to do things in a way that doesn't provide us information about us, then the companies that are trying to foist these technologies on us won't make the profits they want. They will turn to other things. It's up to us to make the choices, not necessarily put all of your contacts into an electronic database. Use a pen on paper. It's hard to hack that.
All right, and now for my response. Are we doomed? Answer, not this week.
While we're out of time here in Ottawa, hold for my closing word of wisdom just 1 minute away. But first, I thank my esteemed guests, Sharon Polsky and Michael Geist, and my fabulous international team, including Christine in Indiana, John in Japan, and Luca in Serbia, for their outstanding work, as well as many others in numerous cities around the world. My team, each of them, is comprised of very dedicated people. I and we all owe them. I'll see everyone back here in 2 weeks at 3 p.m. Eastern. We are on hiatus for next week. You want to be a friend of the Edwin Black Show? Go to theedwinblackshow.com/support. Keep me independent. You want to hear me in person? Watch my website for events, edwinblack.com. In the coming weeks, I will be in Greenville, South Carolina. Consult my events page. Until then, head over to any Barnes & Noble in the USA or any Amazon, Walmart, Apple, or Kobo platform in 190 countries across this roiling, toiling, boiling planet, where you can find any of my 200 book editions, such as IBM and the Holocaust, soon to be a major Hollywood blockbuster. I should live to see it. War Against Weak and Internal Combustion. You want an autographed copy? Hit my personal, newly redesigned website, edwinblack.com, and click books. Get access to participate live in future shows at theedwinblackshow.com. You'll see a much enhanced an exquisitely produced version of this show and prior episodes by subscribing to our YouTube channel at The Edwin Black Show and click that notification button like thousands of others. You will love them. We put new ones up each week. You can follow me at Edwin Black Book on Twitter and Facebook. And now for my closing word of wisdom. Without individual privacy, there is no liberty. Without individual liberty, we have lost our humanity. Thank you, planet Earth. I am zooming out.